Well, thank you everyone again for coming out tonight as we welcome Gayle Boss to come and speak with us. So, Aniva and I, a few years back, do you remember, Aniva, how we found the devotional? Maybe. And we were so taken with this book, and we ended up getting a chance to then read the subsequent one, which is a Lenten devotional. And I only recommend that you read it if you are ready to be wrecked by the stories that are contained within that one. But this one is a really wonderful journey into Advent. And then I had the good fortune of getting a chance to meet with the author Gayle Boss at this last year's Festival of Faith and Writing. And during that conversation, I mentioned that I was going to be starting up at this new church and that I would love to bring her in to speak with all of you about uh, this really great Advent devotional that I hope that you'll all enjoy throughout the season ahead. And so, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gayle Boss.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be joining you
Oh,
tonight.
here, Gayle.
There.
Apparently, I'm not getting your sound. Let me see what's going on there.
Hmm.
How about now, Gayle?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. And now I can see everybody too. Good. Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be joining you tonight. Although I wish I could be there in person, I really would like not to have cooked tonight and to have been part of the potluck. That's for sure. I have to warn you, I woke up this morning. I haven't had a cold for a year and a half, and on the morning of the day that I'm supposed to talk to you, I woke up with a cold. So my nose is like a leaky faucet. So if I have to stop and reach for a tissue, forgive me for that. I'm coming to you tonight from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and if you know, Michigan is a mitten, right? And Grand Rapids is right about there. We're 40 miles inland from the Great Lake, Lake Michigan. And you all in Mankato, I looked this up, are 2 degrees farther north over here in Minnesota. You're 2 degrees latitude farther north than Grand Rapids, farther north. So that tells me tonight that you know the dark, cold season that we're about to enter, maybe even better than I do. So I know I'm talking to kin here tonight. Um, I'm really honored that you're going to be using All Creation Waits as your Advent companion. And it's that book that I want to talk with you a little bit about this evening. On the day after Halloween, that would have been November 1st, I walked into one of the big box stores here in Grand Rapids, and right at the front of the store, there was a big display of Christmas decorations. This was the day after Halloween. I also got a haircut that day, and I walked into the salon of the man who cuts my hair, and he was playing Christmas music that same day, the day after Halloween. By now, of course, if you've shopped anywhere, you know that we're in the midst of what our culture calls the holiday season. I'm going to start sharing my screen now so you can see some pictures that are going to accompany my talk here. Here we go. I want to talk with you a little bit this evening, describing in words and pictures what I think is a healthier response to this time of year, a healthier response than the holiday season. And my slides are not advancing. There we go. Okay, it's going to take a little jolt there. I want to talk about a response to this time of year that's a healthier response than what our culture calls the holiday season. The bright rush of the holiday season, as we know it, is not, as it turns out, a modern phenomenon. In fact, it's an ancient impulse, one that I think is rooted in fear. So I want to describe tonight how a historically and biologically rooted Advent, one that takes into account what the earth and the animals are doing, that kind of an Advent is an antidote, not only to the frenzy of the holiday season, but also to the fear that underlies it, a fear I think we all know. Learning the history of Advent, the historical biological history of Advent, changed my life. It led me to the animals and to writing this book, All Creation Waits. And I want to invite you along tonight on the story of that history, that change in me, and the writing of this book. How many of you grew up with any notion, even a vague notion of what Advent is about? If you're Presbyterians, you probably did. Well, I did not. I grew up in the church, but it was a non-liturgical church, and I don't think I even knew the word Advent until I was in my late 20s. So I didn't know Advent, but I did know this. This is me walking with members of my family on my grandparents' farmstead in northern Michigan on Thanksgiving of last year. By late November, early December in Michigan, especially northern Michigan where I grew up, the days are cloudy, short, gray, dreary, chill. You can feel almost the earth pulling in on itself in a compressed kind of way. And already as a child of 10 or 11, I remember that as November pressed in, I felt too kind of compressed and weighted. I didn't have words for that feeling then, but I think that if I had had words and if I'd said them out loud, I would have been told something like, well, just shake it off. Go do something productive if possible. That heavy gray feeling that I would get lingered with me as the days grew shorter and shorter into December. And it was made worse for me as a child, or at least more confusing, because all the voices around me in myriad ways were saying, it's the most wonderful time of the, and I was thinking, no, really, it's not. It's dark and it's cold. Everything's dying or dead. It's not the most wonderful time of the year. But because no one else was saying that, because to them it was the most wonderful time of the year, I was certain that something was wrong with me. And so I just swallowed it. Well, that late November, early December weightedness stayed with me through my teens and 20s until I married and moved with my husband to Washington, D.C., which is a city that is warmer than northern Michigan in November, but believe me, has its share of gloom. Well, it was in the fall of 1985 in Washington, just as the gloom of November was starting to descend, and I was worried about how depressed I was going to feel. I had an assignment, a writing assignment, to write some things about the history of liturgy in the Christian church. So I went to the library and I ended up with this dusty old tome in my hand. When I read about the history of Advent in that dusty old book, it was like the cylinders of a lock all lined up. And I can still remember the click inside me when that lock popped open just by reading a few pages of this dusty book. They were pages on the history of Advent. So, to explain why that lock popped open, I have to give you a little history of Advent. Advent was instituted in the early Christian church as a time of preparation for Christmas, as it still is. But Christmas on December 25th was not celebrated in the Christian church until the mid 4th century. Before the year 330 AD, nobody celebrated Christmas. I mean, the Gospels, after all, don't give us a day and a month on the calendar for the birth of Jesus. Early church leaders in the 4th century simply decided that Jesus' birthday was going to be December 25th and that they were going to make it a great feast day in the history of the church. Well, why December 25? Why did they pick that day to celebrate the birth of Jesus and not, I don't know, February 16th or May 23rd? Why December 25? Well, today we use the Gregorian calendar, but in the fourth century, people used a calendar called the Julian calendar. And in the Julian calendar, the winter solstice is not December 21st, the winter solstice we know using the Gregorian calendar. For them, the winter solstice was December 25. The solstice marks the day, as you know, when in the northern hemisphere, the sun begins to turn in the sky. It seems to move back toward us. The days get a little longer. Well, that day, when the sun began moving back toward northern skies and the light lasted a few seconds longer every day, that winter solstice day, December 25, remember, in the Julian calendar, that December 25th winter solstice had become, by about the year 300, a huge, raucous celebration in European cultures, and especially Northern European cultures. It was known by many names. You may have heard it called Saturnalia or Yule. Well, why had the winter solstice become the occasion for such a party? Agricultural people in the third and fourth century, the time period we're talking about, they depended on the earth in a way that you and I can hardly imagine. If you or your neighbors didn't grow something, you didn't eat it. If you didn't grow enough of it, you wouldn't be eating come February. And even if you did grow enough of it to get you through that winter, what if the growing season didn't come back? How would you grow another crop? So in late autumn, these early agricultural people, they were feasting on their harvest. They were throwing their version of the Thanksgiving feast. But at the same time that they were feasting, they were growing more fearful by the day. They were feasting and fearful both at the same time. They were fearful as they watched the light fade and the temperatures dropped. What looked clearly to be the death of the earth, they knew could mean the death of them. Yes, they had enough food now after their harvest, but what if the sun, which they could see was leaving northern skies, what if it didn't come back? How would they grow another crop? How would they survive? Well, these early agricultural people dealt with their fear, this fear of primal fear of survival. They dealt with that fear that comes at the end of the year with what the anthropologist Sir James Frazer calls sympathetic magic. When the light in the sky was dying in November and December, these ancient people thought they could call back the light by building huge bonfires on tall hills and hanging lights, torches in their case, everywhere. The idea for them was that if they lit big lights, many lights, they could call back the light. With food crops dying, they thought they could bring back a robust crop life for the following year if they acted as if there was abundance. They would eat and feast on their current crop, and that would be their way of saying, and there will be an abundant crop next year. With animal life all around them dying, they thought they could ensure a robust animal return in the following year by ceaseless human activity, by frenzied activity almost. The idea, again, here with sympathetic magic was that if they acted vigorous and robust and busy, then that kind of robust animal life would come back to them next year. So, lights everywhere, feasting, ceaseless activity, unchecked extravagance. Does all that sound familiar? The holiday season is just the way that we, who think we're sophisticated, are acting on the same impulses of people that we call primitive. When fear of the growing dark and cold comes over us, we too think that lights and feasts and ceaseless activity can stave off the dark and the cold and the fear they bring. what I somehow knew at the age of 10 or 11, the reason I had this dark, weighted feeling in me was that I somehow knew, though I couldn't articulate it, I knew that beneath all these feasts and lights and activities of the holiday season, I knew that light and life are still dying and that that's fearful. It's a primal bodily fear and it's shared by people ancient and modern. Well, the leaders of the early church knew this. They saw all the wild Saturnalia celebrations going on all around them as people pulled out all the stops to bring back light and life. They weren't prudes necessarily, these old church leaders, but they did see that these festivals were largely unhelpful, mostly an expensive disappointment. They understood the fear that was underneath those festivals. The dark and the cold were real threats to their people. They knew that. They understood those fears, but they wanted to remind the faithful how new life truly comes, how fear is truly put to rest. So they said to the faithful in their churches on December 25, when the rest of the world is soaked and reeling in Saturnalia festivals, we're going to celebrate the return, the birth of the true sun. Before we celebrate the coming of the true light, though, we need to prepare ourselves. And paradoxically, we prepare to meet the one great light by acknowledging the end of light, the end of another cycle of life. By facing that end, they said, we're going to face our sorrow. Sorrow not only that the bright season of light and growth is over, but also our sorrow that even it wasn't all that we'd hoped for. And we face our fear that the really lush, abundant life that we had hoped for and that didn't come to us last year might not come to us next year or ever. In the season of Advent preparation, church leaders wanted us to face the fact that the peaceable kingdom, the reign of shalom, well-being for everyone, isn't here yet. Not yet. We acknowledge that in Advent, we're still waiting. We're still longing for a coming that is not yet. And that's why the Advent scriptures assigned through the 4 weeks of Advent, or the ones in the first week at least, speak of a second coming. By asking us to squarely face the darkness and losses at the end of the year, the Advent tradition isn't asking us to capitulate to gloom and doom. It's asking us instead to face our false hopes in the power of intense human activity to bring back the light. It asks us instead to focus on the truth. First, that we do not control the coming of the light. No, light always comes to us from beyond us, beyond our powers. And also important to remember, light not only comes to us from beyond us, but it always begins in small, hidden ways, like one more minute of daylight on the day after the solstice, like a still, small voice that comes to us just when we're despairing and wondering if it's worth going on, a voice that says, "You are my beloved." Or the birth of an infant to peasant refugees in a cave surrounded by animals. That, church leaders were saying, that's what the faithful need to remember about the coming of the light. Not that a lot of human engineered activity, no matter how well intentioned, brings back light and hope, but that light comes as it wills, in the hidden dark. It's the people, as the prophet Isaiah says in one of the Advent scriptures, it's the people who sit in darkness that see the great light. So they said to the faithful, okay, we're going to sit in the dark during this season of preparation, not out of desperation, but with expectation that the light will come to us exactly here where we're waiting in the dark. Advent has always been about reminding us that the dark is not to be feared because the dark is not an end. It's a door. It's the way a new beginning comes. But in a culture with lights everywhere, even in our pockets, with constant pings and notifications and noise of all kinds, with ceaseless activity and guilt if we don't join in, how in the world do we practice quietly waiting in the dark for the true light? Well, leaders of the early church, they had a parallel situation. They had these Saturnalia bashes happening all around them too. It was the equivalent of our holiday season. But what they said, what they instructed the faithful was, here's how we're going to prepare for the true light, the coming of the true light. We are going to fast, pray, and give away. We're going to fast rather than feast, not out of gloom, but to hone our hunger for the great feast of Christmas when we remember what and who really nourish us. We're going to pray not out of a rejection of human camaraderie, but to quiet ourselves, to let go of the relentless distractions, and to remember and recognize what matters, what really lasts. And we're going to give away rather than accumulating. We're going to give away, especially to the poor, not out of guilt, but to free our lives and minds and hearts of all the clutter so we can better receive the true gift that brings real life to us. Now, the genius of this approach, instituted already back in the 4th century, the genius of this approach to Advent is that it nudges human beings to do exactly what the natural world is doing this time of year. Fasting, praying, and giving away, these are human practices that mirror, that are in harmony with the earth's movements in this season. Trees give up their leaves. Plants stop their growing juices. Animals slow way down, some seeming as good as dead. Even the squirrels, those bright little rascals that seem as active in December as they are in August, even they move much less because they're dependent on daylight, and there's so much less daylight. The natural world in Advent is stripping down, directing all energy to the essentials that ensure survival, because the natural world knows what matters. Fasting, praying, giving away, these practices allow us to strip down to the essentials, just like the earth is doing. They allow us to tune into the rhythms humming in the cells of every created thing, including the rhythms humming in the cells of our own bodies. Advent wisely encourages us to live in rhythm with the earth because we are made of earth. The word human comes from the same root word as humus, meaning soil. Human beings are just beings made of soil. We are made of the earth. And not to live in rhythm with the earth puts us all out of sync. I think that's why I experienced such gloom as a child, even though I was participating in the holiday season activities. I knew, or my body knew without my mind knowing it, that I was out of sync with the rest of creation. And I think most of us know that now still. That's why this time of year is so difficult for so many people and why we're all falling easily prey. We fall easy prey to the costly distractions of the holiday season. We know something isn't lining up. When I learned all of this, that's when that lock inside me popped open. It was an aha moment, I tell you, because I discovered I wasn't crazy. No, I was sane enough to be tuned to the cycles of the earth, to sense that loss all around me. But the history of all Advent also told me that I could turn my annual December sadness into something good and helpful by paying attention to the earth and its creatures and to the Advent practices of the church, fasting, praying, and giving away. So from 1985 on, my husband Doug and I began to practice a true Advent, not a Christmas countdown. The church called Advent a season of waiting in the dark, as the natural world does. So we kept the Christmas decorations in their boxes. We had only this Advent wreath, which we lit each evening after dinner and where we sang, O come, Emmanuel. And then when Christmas Eve came, when Emmanuel came, we pulled out all the decorations, we went to church, and we had a great party. When we began to celebrate a true Advent, the December sadness that I remember feeling since I was a child, that left my soul. I began looking forward to the season of cold and dark as a time of quiet waiting, a season not to be dreaded, but a season of contentment. All of this worked well enough until we had a child. And that child at the age of 4 came home one day and he said, Mama, how come Evan's house is all Christmassy and ours is cold and dark and quiet? Well, we tried explaining to Kai that we were waiting in the dark with all creation, but it was not compelling to a busy 4-year-old. So I thought, okay, we have to make this waiting in the dark with all creation. We have to make this more vivid and compelling somehow. Ah, an advent calendar, that's what we need. Well, these days, you can find an advent calendar for every interest and fetish. This one features a gourmet tea bag behind each of the little cutout doors. But when I was looking for an advent calendar for my little boy, there were basically two kinds for kids. There were the calendars that had Santa and reindeer and stockings behind the little cutout doors. And there were advent calendars that featured the cast of the Nativity. Utterly frustrating because these were Christmas calendars. They weren't advent calendars. I wanted an advent calendar that told my little boy the reason that we have to have Advent, not the birth, the reason we need the birth. I wanted my son to know as he opened each door of his Advent calendar that Advent is about darkness and light, fear and hope, loss and a new beginning. So I had no choice but to make my own Advent calendar. Here it is. You can see it's all black because Advent is the dark season. On door number 1, behind door number 1, I drew a painted turtle buried in the mud. I drew a painted turtle in the mud because days before I began making this calendar, my son's godmother sent me her reflection on painted turtle as a symbol for what a healthy soul might do when it feels threatened, when it feels itself in a dark place. So I put the turtle on my Advent calendar because turtle gave me such a good image of how waiting in the dark can be a restorative practice, not a depressive practice. And I drew a turtle on our Advent calendar because my little boy, like all the children I've ever known, loved pictures of animals. Well, after Painted Turtle, other animals began queuing up to be on our Advent calendar. There was a bear, a loon, a snake, all of them symbols for what a healthy soul might do when it finds itself in a place that is dark and cold and threatening. Well, my boys, first Kai and then Cotter, have loved that Advent calendar. They still come home, even though they are grown men now, they still come home some of the days of Advent and want to open the doors of the Advent calendar. took me about 18 years to come up with the idea that this Advent calendar that my kids loved could be a book of Advent meditations for adults. I guess my mind and heart were busy with other things in those 18 years, but I also think that there might not have been a readership for this book in 1996 when I was making the calendar. We're only lately coming to grasp what I want to convey in this book and in my Lent book, too, that Pastor Eric described. What I want to convey is that animals are not on the earth to interest us or amuse us or for us to use as products or machines. Animals are interesting, they're often amusing, but animals are more than that. They can be our companions, our guides to a life well lived on the earth. They have wisdom for us. Wise people, wise humans across the ages have been telling us this very thing. The author of the book of Job, perhaps as long ago as 2000 BC, wrote, "But ask the animals, they will teach you, and the birds in the air, they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, it will teach you, and the fish in the sea will inform you." 4,000 years later, Brian Swim, a cosmologist and scholar at the California Institute of Integral Studies, he writes, "As humans allow themselves to be fascinated by other creatures, we become convinced that in some amazing way, they are essential to us. We can become amazed by how essential they are for us, for our zest, our sense of well-being or happiness. If we would attend to them, we would see their colossal grandeur." And maybe my favorite of these wise people who talk to us about the animals, a German philosopher and mystic of the 13th century, the monk Meister Eckhart. His words open the book, All Creation Waits. He says, "Every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God. If I spent enough time with the tiniest creature, even a caterpillar, I would never have to prepare a sermon. So full of God is every creature." Hundreds of wise women and men have been telling us this for millennia. We modern people have simply forgotten or ignored that wisdom to our peril. Now, maybe we're waking up to read the book of God, to hear the word of God in every creature. In this season, in Advent, the creatures are saying, "Strip down to essentials. Wait with us. Yes, here in the dark." Because the dark is not an end, it's a door. It's the way a new beginning comes. I'd like to close by reading the first reflection in All Creation Waits, the reflection for Advent 1, December 1. And it's the same animal, it comes from the same animal as the one I put behind door number 1 on my Advent calendar, the painted turtle. So this is the reflection in the book for Advent 1, painted turtle. And after I read it, we'll have some time, I think, for questions. Advent 1, painted turtle. The day is bright and warm for December 1, but the logs in the marsh pond are bare. Summer, spring to summer into early fall, they served, on sunny days, as spa to a dozen or so painted turtles. I would see them basking, splay-legged, stretching their leathery necks out full length, avid for every luscious atom of sunlight and sun warmth. Out of sight now, they've not escaped the harsher cold that's coming. The water is maybe waist deep in this pond, but a murky soup clogged with roots and plants. One day in the fall, as water and air cooled. At some precise temperature, an ancient bell sounded in the turtle brain. A signal. Take a deep breath. Each creature slipped off her log and swam for the warmer muck bottom. Stroking her way through the woven walls of plant stems, she found her bottom place. She closed her eyes and dug into the mud. She buried herself. And then, pulled into her shell, encased in darkness, she settled into a deep stillness. Her heart slowed and slowed, almost to stopping. Her body temperature dropped and stopped just short of freezing. Now, beneath a layer of mud, beneath the weight of frigid water and its skin of ice and skim of snow, everything in her has gone so still she doesn't need to breathe. And anyway, the iced over pond will soon be empty of oxygen. Sunk in its bottom mud, for 6 months she will not draw air into her lungs. To survive a cold that would kill her, or slow her so that predators would kill her, she slows herself beyond breath in a place where breath is not possible, and waits. As ice locks in the marsh water and howling squalls batter its reeds and brush, beneath it all, she waits. It is her one work, and it is not easy. Oxygen depletion stresses every particle of her. Lactic acid pools in her bloodstream. Her muscles begin to burn. Heart muscle, too, a deadly sign. That acid has to be neutralized, and calcium is the element to do it. Out of her bones, then out of her shell, her body pulls calcium, slowly dissolving her structure, her shape, her strength. But to move to escape, requiring breath in a place where there is no oxygen, that would suffocate her. So, though she is dissolving, every stressed particle of her stays focused on the silver bead of utter quietude. It's this radical simplicity that will save her. And deep within it, at the heart of her stillness, something she has no need to name, but something we might call trust. That one day, yes, the world will warm again, and with it, her life. Well, thank you so much for being willing to hear me this evening talk about this book. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I can see you all to take some questions. And Pastor Eric is going to moderate that for us.
Well, Gayle, thank you so much for sharing with us. And I would like to open it up if there are any questions this evening that Gayle might be able to answer for us. I will try to repeat what I hear from you so that everyone on the computer can hear your question as well. Yeah, Rick. Are you an ordained minister?
Thanks God, no. No, although I'll tell you, I do have about half of a seminary degree, but that was for nefarious reasons. I enrolled in seminary because my husband had dropped out of seminary, but we needed the married student housing because we couldn't afford anything else. So I enrolled, and I actually liked it a lot, but I knew that what Pastor Eric does is way beyond what I can manage. Like the pastoral care and the administration is all way I'd like to preach. I like to preach. I've done preaching, but that's all of his job that I want, not all the rest.
Many of us attended seminary for nefarious reasons. I attended the one I did because I knew that it would give me the best financial aid. So, any other questions for Gayle? Aniva has one. Hmm. Which animal was the last one to make it into the calendar?
That's a really interesting story. Um, it was the cardinal, and I had a deadline, and I was coming up on the deadline, and I still had 3 or 4 animals to write, and I knew there was one place that I had open. I didn't know what animal to put in that one open space. It turns out not to be the last animal in the book. It's December 22. But I had that space open and I didn't know what to put in it. And I thought, oh, what? So I was praying one day at my prayer place, and I wasn't really praying, actually. I had my eyes closed, but I was thinking about what animal, what animal, what animal. I wasn't really praying. And right outside my prayer place, my prayer altar, there are French doors. And right outside those French doors, there's a wooden step. And as I was pretending to pray with my eyes closed, I heard this tapping. And I opened my eyes and I turned around and looked out the French doors, and there was a cardinal, a northern cardinal, tap, tap, tapping on the wooden step outside the French doors. I've never seen that before or since, but I knew it was Cardinal saying to me, "Hey, I want in the book." So Cardinal was the last one, and he came and announced himself. I really believe, and that's a true story, and I really believe that the animals began to help me as I began to write the book, and they saw I was serious, and they came to my aid. There's a similar story about the red fox showing up when I wasn't looking for him and hadn't thought to include a red fox. But there he was on a Sunday morning, just at sunrise on the edge of the field. And I said, "Oh, you are magnificent. You're right. You need to be in the book."
Yes. Hmm. Do they have to be wild animals or could they be cats and dogs? And I assume you're asking also about just the imparting of wisdom or specifically for the inclusion in the book.
Oh, for the imparting of wisdom, a gerbil, a hamster, anything, yes. But for the Advent book, I wanted them to be wild animals that are still in touch with the rhythms of the earth that are coded into them. The animals we've domesticated, because we've domesticated them, have lost a lot of them. Not all of them. I mean, I think cows, donkeys, pigs still have a lot of those rhythms too. But I wanted to talk about the natural wild world in this book. Yeah.
April.
Very contemplative. Do you meditate? And if so, how do you quiet the world?
So there's an observation about how you are a contemplative person and seem like you can quiet yourself. And do you meditate? And if so, how do you quiet the world?
Yeah, I do every day. I start my day after I'm awake with an hour of Lectio Divina and then centering prayer. So that's my daily practice before I start work each day. The scriptures, sometimes a little other contemplative reading, and then a half an hour of centering prayer. But then at lunchtime, I take a break at lunch, and then also after dinner in the evening, I walk in a nature preserve that the university I live right in the backyard of a university. Their nature preserve is a 5-minute walk from my back door. And so I walk through the nature preserve also every day, a couple times a day. In fact, it was in that preserve that I watched all the animals that are in All Creation Waits, except for the black bear. Not the black bear, or the porcupine. We're too far south in Michigan for porcupines, and the lake trout. Those all I observed in my hometown. My hometown is up here near the tip of Michigan's mitten. And I go up every year, Thanksgiving and Christmas, go back home. And so those more northern animals, the ones that are in the northern forests, deciduous beech, maple forests, I observed up there. But all the rest right here in my backyard in the Calvin University Nature Preserve.
Susan.
Wondering if you had the opportunity or chose to connect with Native peoples about their understandings of the world and creation, wildlife, and if that influenced or was something that came about or not in the process of evolution for yourself and the connection you have. Wow.
So the question is, have you come into contact at all with indigenous peoples' perspectives of wildlife? And if so, how has that shaped your understanding of the sort of stories that you're telling about wildlife? Is that kind of a good summary? Yep. So that's the question.
That's the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I've actually, do you know, I grew up next door to a girl who was there was a contingent of, we called them Chippewa in that day. Now we know them as Ojibwe tribe in my hometown. And a girl my age grew up next to me. I wonder, actually, I wonder if I internalized some of Sandra's and her parents' approach to the world. But they weren't living really tightly in a Native community, practicing Native ways. I've just done a lot of reading in my adult life because it fascinates me, this connection to the natural world, this ability to sense its rhythms in our own rhythms and to live in harmony with them. So it's been a lot of reading. I don't even know many indigenous people personally. I don't. Yeah.
So have you had a chance to read the Braided Sweetgrass?
Yeah.
That has been a huge piece for me into the understanding of what you're talking about. Well, comparing our world and how we see it, and then how she'll talk about the event where her family told her to pick up walnuts anywhere they would go and stuff their clothing with it, and then ended up, I don't know if you remember that in there, ended up living on that during one winter because they had no food. Just this whole idea of how we perceive the earth and how they're so connected to it in every way possible. It was just a profound book for me.
Yeah.
That was something too. I'm really connecting in a way when you're.
All I heard, Eric, was really, yeah, the reference to braiding sweetgrass and
Mhm. Yeah, so essentially, as the braiding sweetgrass and the reference to the story about walnuts and the need to survive on that over the course of a winter, and the sort of connection to the rhythms and the provision of the
Yeah.
natural world.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book, and Eva's read a lot more of it than I have. That's also a wonderful one to read.
Yeah, she is just, I think she's woken up so many people to the beauty of this way of living. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Um, she's marvelous. And my dearest friend in all the world has met her and spoken with her and says she's just exactly in person as she is, you would imagine in her book. Just a beautiful human being.
And Eva, do you have another question? Is there an animal in the book that continues to challenge you more personally than perhaps others?
Well, I'll tell you a story about a particular challenge. I don't know one continuously more, but there was a specific incident where an animal challenged me. Yes, I was on retreat. This was in Advent of 2022. And the Advent leader, the retreat leader, was using all creation weights to anchor the retreat. She invited me to come along and read from the book on that retreat. And all around this big room with big windows, she had taken apart the book and she'd laminated all the woodcuts and put the pictures of the animals all around the room. And the opening exercise for us on retreat was to walk around the room and see if one of the animals just reached out and grabbed us and wanted to speak to us during that retreat. And I kind of rolled my eyes, I confess. I thought, I have lived with these animals for years since I started writing this book in 2013. So by that time, I'd lived with these animals for almost 10 years. And I thought, I've lived with these animals. There's not, I don't think, no, there's nothing more I can learn. What hubris, right? Or at least in that moment, I didn't expect it. So I was walking around the room and I experienced this immediate tug right at my center to the animal I least expected to tug on me, and that was the firefly. The firefly, the illustration in the book is of a firefly larva. And I thought, really? But it was undeniable. The illustration, when you read the book, you'll see it. It's got kind of a glowing light at the center of this larva because they glow underground. And it just reached out and grabbed me. And so I sat with that firefly larva through the day-long retreat. And it was apparent to me that it was telling me that a writing project that I was very avid about and that I wanted just to keep working on. In fact, I was hesitant to sign up for the retreat because I didn't want to miss a writing day, that writing project I had to put away. I had to just walk away from it for a time because I didn't know enough to write it. It was not my time to write it. And the firefly larva stays underground for more than 300 days of the year. And I realized that I had to stay underground in a sense with this particular writing project anyway, or I had to leave it underground for a long time yet because what I was writing wasn't deep or authentic. So I did. I left it alone for almost a year. That was a challenge.
Are there any other questions today?
I hope the animals speak to you all. I hope one of them reaches out and, if you read the book, really reaches out and speaks to you in whatever season of life you're in and offers some word that maybe even is challenging but can be restorative.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gayle. It has been such an honor and a privilege to have you with us this evening. And I know that I'm excited to dive back into the book again this year.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me. I really like to talk about the animals. I'd really like to talk about the book. And as I say, I'm honored that you want to bring it along on your Advent commemoration this year. Thank you. You're
Well,
all
Gayle, we hope that
generous.
you feel well very soon. And
Yeah,
we thank
thanks.
you for being with us, even as you're starting to get this cold.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Um, I'll see if I can leave the meeting. Oh, then there's the little icon.
Have a blessed
It,
Advent.
yes, thank you. You all too. And Eric, be in touch. Let me
I
know how
will.
it goes. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.